to start the discussion, I don't know. I would be Bo. How do you see what's going on in our industry? So we're seeing this growing request for documentaries. How do you see it from this side? Is it a bubble, or is it sustainable?
I think Corona or COVID really helped this genre, because it was during this time that a lot of scripted and a lot of shows had to go into lockdown. So, and it's also a time where society started looking at itself and kind of going, what's going on? This is not normal. So a lot of the genres that we were competing against as factual people were having a sleep. So factual could come to the foreground, but also there was a cognitive shift in society where like, this is not normal. We need to look at ourselves and the world more. And that also helped the genre. And then during that time, as with all things in life, once the channels and the networks and the streamers started experimenting with factual more because they had to, and society had to, they actually found it was a very functional genre. In the last couple of years, formats and drama was always at the forefront, and big deals had to be made, also driven by the big M&A deals. Doing small factual deals didn't move the dial. So we had to have big ratings, big prime time, bigger is better. And I think the 2 years we're coming out of really helped us. What I am seeing that it's vogue right now, and anything that comes up will eventually come down, but it's a big up for us. And I think on the way up, what I'm seeing is in the factual genre, it mimics the scripted genre. There's much more packaging. There's much more. When you work in drama, you have to buy the book rights, you have to have access to unique IP. Well, the unique IP in factual is, well, I've got access to the pyramids or the Pantheon, or, and I think that's why Italy for the MIA market is very interesting, because everybody knows Italy from, the ancient days to contemporary food culture. There's a lot of rich IP in Italy that hasn't really been exported by Italians, but a lot of foreigners have come in to film it. But I think it's time now for Italians to tell their stories from within. Anyway, so I'm jumping. So that's the reason why I think it's booming, right? It's a bit of a spring, and as it's on the way up, unique access is really, really important. And what I'm really finding very exciting is that the creative storytelling that you find in scripted and in formats are now appearing in factual, making it a bit more hybrid, also making it a bit more budget and a bit more louder so the channels can promote it. So I think it's having a heyday, and I think it will come down again, but not as harsh, because on its way up, it will have rediscovered itself, reinvented itself. And I think it's here to stay for a longer period.
Yeah, I think especially because if you look at an audience below, let's say 35 or 40, they'll make a huge difference if they see a high-end drama series or a high-end docu series. It has to be entertaining, of course, but it's not like in the old days where you had public broadcasters who late at night would screen documentaries and would have more factual stuff during the day as well. It's really, I think, it's a whole generation that grew up with YouTube, so they're very, very used to have real people talking to them, also in a subjective way. So I think there's also some issues with that, because it's a lot about opinions then and about point of views, and not about, let's say, more journalistic approaches. And this will stay for sure. So the viewing habits, they are here, they will not disappear. There's a bit of a strange overheating on the market, but overall I think it's a sustainable change as well. It's interesting because as myself being Italian, living in Germany for longer than I used to live in Italy, I've seen Italy coming late to the party, and coming now. I've seen the industry moving, so it's a bit late, but maybe it's a second mover advantage, because it can do a lot from what has gone wrong in other places. And what I see here, the costs for production, they're exploding. So it's very difficult to get the talent who can do this kind of, the storytelling and the bigger projects. and still you have a lot of a strong industry in Italy, who has been struggling and working with lower budgets for a long time. So I think the talent is there, the topics are there. It's a bit of a question of the international storytelling standards. That's what we, for instance, I mentioned this series on Berlusconi we're working on. So this is challenging because on one hand, we are telling it for international audience. It's basically the young Berlusconi, so the 70s and the 80s, the invention of public televisions, a lot of 80s archives, Milano da Bere, so a lot of this kind of stuff. And you, of course, you need to tell it differently for international audience than you do it for Italian audience. So we first decided to make it international because we're telling it for that audience, and then we'll see if we make an Italian version, or if the series will land with a streamer, where then again you have a different audience. So this question of audiences as well, are you telling the story for? It's challenging, and with Berlusconi it's tricky because we have a super strong cast, but nobody knows this cast outside of Italy because it's basically the big guys in the second row.
The exact same problem opportunity. We're just producing a film on the Pope Francis encyclica and how to rescue the environment, and it's a YouTube original. And how do you present the Vatican and the Pope to an audience where YouTube original will find it interesting? It's a big split between ancient ways, also visually it looks very old, and how do you make that appealing for a younger audience? And I think that's where unique storytelling and real skills come in. And
how are you solving this, Bo, if I may ask? Because
I can't tell you. No, it's you solve it with music. This specific one is with music and juxtapositioning it with images that you wouldn't expect. So the audience is always second guessing of, well, where is this going? And the one thing you said earlier that I want to go back on is there is a risk, because I was speaking to Marco, is how small the production budgets are in Italy. But in actual fact, the smaller the production budgets, the higher the skill of the filmmaker, because creativity doesn't necessarily cost that much. It's like, well, how do we tell a story in the edit if we've got no money, right? And if the whole economy would then suddenly jump up and suddenly go, oh, I want 3 million for a Netflix feature, you're just cranking up the cost of labor, as you said, the skill of suddenly the cameraman costs 3 times as much, but they're delivering the same work. That's where it's very, very, you have to be very, very careful that the budget spent actually ends on screen rather in just inflated overheads. And that's just something I would, advise people to make sure they don't suddenly triple charge themselves out to the market.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's with a changing appetite for documentaries and this new audience, which is younger. That's why I was asking, because the series we are finishing right now we are telling the 80s basically, and for it's for public broadcasters, so it's for the audience who lived the 80s, so it's a rediscovery for them. But we're telling it for a streaming audience, a younger one who only knows about this period. So, and as a consequence, all our interview partners, they are in their late 70s. So how do you make that appealing, and how do you avoid to have this like almost old men talking about the old days who were great, of course. So it's a big challenge, and it's solvable. It's interesting. I think it's super interesting creative challenge, because it's really a huge difference. What we also learned when we did our Netflix show on Rohwedder, which is basically a story about 1990, so 30 years ago. We did it was for Netflix, so we did a lot of testing with the Netflix audience. They don't know about, because they haven't lived the period, which is fair enough. But how do you make it relevant for them? That's an interesting challenge, because our audience is different now.
Yeah. But I think that's what I said earlier. It's playing with the different genres, like docudramas, music. Just put visual storytelling into factual that you wouldn't be expecting. Like 2D animations, don't make it look clever in 3D, like Walking with Dinosaurs. Be simple, right? And people will enjoy it.
with the new kids on the block, with the new players, the streamers coming on the market, there is also narrowing down, also to mention some, not only about the chances, but also some challenges, I think. Basically, all looking, it's a lot of crime, it's celebrities and it's sports. So if you look at Amazon, how many documentaries about football they have, it's incredible. And we have also to mention that, is it still a documentary or is it more of a PR work controlled by agents and stuff? So I'm a bit preoccupied about this development because the line is blurring, and we're also talking about a period where people more and more distrust media and get skeptical about what they see, and we see a lot of also works coming out with the gray zone. I'm also working on a project on a gray zone, because when the moment you mix up the documentary story with serious storytelling, there's this tension between we have to push the story and to be still journalistically correct. So in the news booming right now, there are a lot of issues, and this is a big change. Meanwhile, classical documentaries, let's say the observational documentary, the more journalistic work, is a bit. You won't find that on the streamers, and that will raise a question, I think, in the future. What's the difference between factual documentaries or non-fiction work for public broadcasters and streamers? Will there be two markets, which in the old days was more private television and public television? So these are the big changes, and there will be winners and losers, I think, in the genres and everything. So yeah, so I'm also a bit preoccupied, I have to say, from times to times when I have to think about it.
Well, from a CEO point of view, like managing an organization, I would ask all the Italian producers out there who've been struggling over the last couple of years is to develop something that they uniquely stand for, or they can have access to. Like, I've got access to Assisi, or I've got access to the Pope, or I've got access to a certain, what I call an IP, like a building, or I've got behind door access to the Illuminati, or take all the Michelangelo, you take all these classic old storytelling that exists that are almost like IP. Find your niche within all of that you authentically sit within, fight for access. And once you have the access, bring it to MIA, bring it to the international market, and kind of go, I can tell the traditional story that we've been telling for years and years, and I can repeat that story just with a new twist, with a new narrative, with more drama, more CGI. That's business. You will always sell it. If you have the access, you will sell it. But you can also kind of go, I'll make it interesting for the streamers. I will take the same access, but I'll look through the lens of what the streamers find interesting. And they find, sexual diversity, racial diversity, what is Rome, ancient Rome, through the view of a woman, right? Or a gay person, or, and take these very contemporary subject matters, use the access that you have to tell the story that people would expect to see, but you give it a contemporary twist. So as long as you're investing into getting access to these IP that we all know already, and you could scour the market, as Georg was saying, is it an Italian serial killer, or is it this, or is it that? Just go for genres which are very familiar, get your unique access, and then you can spin it to either make it a very local story, or you can crank it up to make it a very big streamer story. But as long as, so you can stretch your development, if that makes sense. Yes? No?
I also think what you said, I think it's a very good advice, because you need to have something very special. It can be access, to the Vatican, whatever that is, that others can do. Because we're also seeing, for instance, that some of the streamers they're not coming to Germany to produce German stories. They're doing it out from London, and they're hiring a local crew. So especially with this strong dominance of the Anglo-Saxon players, as American, for them it's much easier to work out of London, because it's the same storytelling tradition, the same language, and it's very difficult for them to work in the territory. So there's also danger there.
Yes, it's classic to the Italian culture. There's access that we foreigners can't get. You know, I'm making it up. Did Mother Teresa have a sister? You know, there's so much you can look at. But just think, how can I, as an Italian producer, do something unique? And access is unique. There are language barriers, there's cultural barriers. But once you have that access, you have a portfolio of ideas on the back of which you can sell it. And I think that gives the producer flexibility, but also the strength to create competition between RAI, Discovery, and a streamer. And then once you have the competition to the access, you will sell your slate.
I think it's a very, very drastic change in our industry that we are living through right now. And it's difficult to understand because I think in 5 years' time, we will know better. But I see a strong, what the streamers are doing, they're producing for a global audience and they need local content. So big question here is the legislation. So the so-called Netflix quota. So if they are forced to spend money in the countries, they will do it. If they're not forced, they will not do it, or do it to a certain extent. But it's a very hierarchical system. A lot is decided out of LA. You have the local players as well. So the tendency to have more formatted style storytelling that works for international audience, and this is imposed by the big players. I see a strong pressure coming from that side, and you need to be very, and it's not an auteur idea anymore. It's really much more producer driven and writer driven, much more conceptual. I think you can see it in drama already, which has been not very interesting in drama series and creative in the last years. I think one thing we forgot to mention about the boom of non-fiction is because also fiction series, they are not, 5 or 8 years ago, it was the talk on every party. Have you seen that series or that stuff? And there was talking about it, And I'm not talking about fiction series anymore on party. I'm not going on parties anymore. So, but if I would, but you know what I mean. So it's there's a creative fatigue, I think, in storytelling, and there is also a risk of too much formatting. And not enough creativity that we bore the audience.
Yeah, it's very interesting what you're saying, that where scripted on average delivers more emotion, or it's more produced emotion, and factual is driven in the classical sense by information, right? And when the two of them meet, that's where the streamers and everybody's very, very interested in. And you will see a very big spike in relationship dating formats, because it's formatted, it's structured. I can have a big American series. I can then take that format, localize it in Italy. When the Italians find the Italian dating show and they like it, they can start watching the back catalog of the American version, the Dutch version, the German version. But the beauty within this manufactured emotion is that it's very relatable. And the amount there's going to be a streamer war around dating shows, and which is great. They will do it, but again, for the MIA market, what is really, really interesting, and it's when I was working in the format business, that's where the Italians were always a bit behind. There is a huge amount of formats out there which are called social responsibility or social experiments, where there was one format where they had old age homes and they took kindergartens and they put them together. It was an op-doc to see what happens when kindergartens and old age homes work more together. And surprise, surprise, both the kids and the old people came out better and weller. And on the back of that, in Denmark, for example, they started building old age homes with kindergartens attached to it. So if you're an Italian producer right now, I would scour the market for these social experiments formats, buy them, offer them, because it's time. Factual is not only a schedule filler, it's also a time for the country to look at itself. And through these social experiments, another one was the restaurant that makes mistakes. It was a restaurant where everybody that worked there had Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is a thing. Our populations are becoming older and older and older, and we will have a population of workers who will have Alzheimer's but will need to work. So look at those formats, because you don't have to develop them. They are available in the market, and you can source them and then offer them out. Again, it's what I said earlier about having a unique access and then build a portfolio around it. If you take, okay, let's look at social experiments, and then I'll look at all of them, and I'll prepare myself as a producer that I'm going to be the best production company in Italy for social experiments, and I'm going to offer them out. And if you have them, if you have the top 5, guess what? The streamers, the public broadcasters, or the commercial networks will come, and you create a bidding war, and that's how you create business. The market has been very, I'm going to use an aggressive word, very lazy. And they've imported a lot of content and made the imports work, right? The licensed content. And that's, of course, and if you only import cheeseburgers, well, then everybody's going to eat cheeseburgers, right? And then you forget your own local cuisine. So it's time for the broadcasters to stop importing and using the money to localize and find ways. And that's the bravery. The bravery has to come from the people with the money, not the creative community. I think the creative community is there, and where they need help, there's a big production community in the world that can help. That's not the problem. I think the problem is where the money sits, and the bravery needs to be there.
Mm-hmm. Address also this issue of what is the DNA of public broadcasters and documentaries, because we are seeing the streamers have the young audiences watching a lot of non-fiction stuff. The public broadcasters have the older audiences watching a lot of non-fiction stuff, and I think they have to become younger. And there will be, I think, an important discussion of how, because I think in 2 years, 3 years time, a project that finishes at Netflix or Amazon or HBO, whatever that is different from what should finish at the public broadcast, or discuss it at least. Is it the same? Is it different? But also to use this energy and the success of the streamers to put pressure on the public broadcasters to become younger, to become more experimental, to put more money aside for documentaries. We know the budgets, they are too low. And if they learn that with well-produced documentaries, you can reach a broad audience, you can have actually cheap primetime program. I think that's the important step. It's not the niche anymore. And if they're not changing, we're seeing the change here in Germany. It's difficult, but it's happening. They're not changing. They will be out in 20 years when their classical audience will die out.
Correct.